236, Chapter 15 of Dracula. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion. Episode 236, Mary Mary. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by Knit Circus, the online magazine featuring 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can find out more by visiting www.knitcircus.com. Also, Cool for Cats, the new novel by Andrew C. Ordover. You can get it at amazon.com or find out more from the link in the show notes. Or you can listen to the first chapter as read by the author by visiting Forgotten Classics podcast page and listening to Lanyap 50. That would be the podcast that was released on December 17th, 2011. Very exciting stuff. Thank you, Julie. And thank you also to Stitcher Radio, the app you can download for free and listen to CraftLit via, just to reverse the grammaticalness of that sentence, and also audible.com. If you go to audiblepodcast.com/craftlit and join for a free trial, CraftLit Podcast will benefit. Thank you very much for your support. And additionally, in the month of December 2011, if you donate to the podcast, you will be put into the drawing for 2 gorgeous patterns from Julie Temiseva in the UK. Those patterns can be seen on the CraftLit homepage at craftlit.com. Well, if all is right in the world, this podcast has released itself automatically on December 23rd, 2011, and it comes to you with hearty greetings for the season. If everything has gone well, I should be in Tucson at this point with family and friends having a ball. I hope you are having a ball as well. And just to throw something out there real quick, if you have a moment, please send a healthy thought in the direction of John Scholes in the UK. He's back in hospital. He is our Jonathan Harker, who, as you know, has been doing a marvelous job for us. He knew he was starting to feel bad. He pre-recorded a bunch of chapters for us. Such is his devotion to the CraftLit family. And, it's just nice to send a hello and thank you out into the ethers and bring him some holiday cheer. You can go to his website via the link on the CraftLit show notes sidebar and drop in and pay him a visit that way, although I don't know if he'll be able to pick up email very frequently while he is, in fact, in hospital. So kind of a lousy time to be feeling lousy. On a different note, literally, because it is about singing, there is a flash mob that was done at, I think, Carlson College, a part of, not Carleton College. Carlson College, I think it's part of the University of Minnesota. There was a beautiful flash mob that was perpetrated on the people of the university, and it was filmed. It was filmed really nicely, and I have put a link to it from the show notes at craftlit.com for this episode 236. If you are in a holiday frame of mind, it will certainly support that. If you haven't really been able to get into a holiday frame of mind yet, it is something that just might put you over the edge. It's beautiful. It's just one of those things where you just love people. It's so well done. And so a big, huge shout out to all of the people who were involved in the making of that flash mob video. It's really lovely. But now, on with the show. It just didn't seem right to have anyone howling today. And yet, there will be more Dracula. So, when last we left our intrepid Dracula, soon to be hunters, because you can kind of see that coming, right? They're going to have to hunt him down, which is not going to be fun. You already know that. So we now know that Van Helsing absolutely believes that Lucy is, in fact, the Blue Fur Lady, which is bad news for everyone, because as we've heard Van Helsing reference this before, we know that bad things have to be done to the bodies of vampires to get them to no longer be able to prey on the innocent. And that means that those things are going to have to be done to Lucy now. As you might expect, Dr. Seward is not particularly thrilled with this turn of events. And again, we've mentioned this before, Seward is our link to the people in the story, to the supernatural elements of the story, that we are brought into the story and we go into the story largely with him. And we started with Jonathan and experienced what he experienced with him, and then we kind of went to Seward and Mina. Mina, of course, being just as rational as Seward is, but Seward has an extra hurdle to get over, and that is that he has been trained as a scientist, as a doctor, and so he's going to be that uber-rational mind that may very well have been the mind of most Victorian men at the time. You know, certainly someone who was well-bred, who was very well aware of propriety and its restrictions and limitations, and that's going to put him in a slightly different position than Mina would be. Mina, at this point, has already turned the corner and understands what happened to Jonathan in Transylvania and understands that it wasn't a fever dream. Both she and Jonathan now understand that they are dealing with something very primitive, very primal, very scary, very unknowable at this point. They don't entirely know what Dracula is capable of, but they do feel like they have an ally in Van Helsing, and that is great. Because when something like this happens, you need to have someone around you who knows what's going on. It's very like that. If you go back to the excellent scary movie Poltergeist, for those of you who are too young, you should know that when it came out, it was pretty scary, and not slasher film scary. It was scary, like creepy scary, like Dracula scary, because it made the implausible look so probable. And there's the moment where Jo Beth Williams and the little girl have figured out that they can get whatever it is to pull the little girl across the floor. So they put a kid's football helmet on the little girl, and she sits there with her legs crossed, and she gets pulled across the floor, and it's very funny. And, rather rapidly, it becomes not very funny. And once it crosses that line from something that is exotic and new and different and interesting, and turns into something that might actually harm your family quite seriously, you need to find an expert. It's very much that it's all fun and games until someone loses an eye, and then you need to go to the doctor. Well, in Poltergeist, the character, she was kind of a very short woman who's the one who uttered the very creepy, "I don't know what evil hovers over this house." I think she was actually based on a parapsychologist, a paranormal researcher named Thelma Moss. And I don't know why I know that. Back when I went to UCLA, somebody knew something about the making of the movie. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that having an expert around in a situation that is totally outside your ken, something that you can't possibly know enough about, it's so vital to have a Van Helsing. And people can say all they want to about elitists and experts and all that stuff, but when you're in the middle of a situation like this, an expert is who you want to go to. Because they're the ones who are going to keep the vampire off your throat. So, a couple of things to know about this chapter before we head in. There's a quote, it's almost a throwaway quote, early on in the chapter from Dr. Seward, and he's reporting back to us his conversation. It's a continuation of his conversation with Van Helsing. He quotes a poem by Lord Byron. Now, for those of you who are not intimately acquainted with Lord Byron, I'm sure he would have been very sad about that, as he seemed to like being intimately acquainted with pretty much everyone. He wrote a rather famous poem called Don Juan, and it is not pronounced Don Juan. This is what my professor told me. It's not pronounced Don Juan because Don Juan doesn't scan correctly. There is more than one line when his name is stated in the poem, and in order to get the meter and the rhyme to work correctly, his name has to be pronounced Don Juan. So that's a tasty little tidbit. Now, the line that Seward is referring to, he talks about not wanting to prove a kind of abhorrent truth. And then he says Byron accepted from this category. And of course, Byron was rather rakish. So there's Byron himself, who would have thought that was just peachy fine and, ravished many a young person. And he quotes from a section of Lord Byron's Don Juan, Canto 1, published in 1819. I can't tell how or why or what suspicion could enter into Don Alfonso's head, but for a cavalier of his condition, it surely was exceedingly ill-bred, without a word of previous admonition, to hold a levee round his lady's bed, and summon lackeys armed with fire and sword, to prove himself the thing he most abhorred. That's Canto 1, stanza 138. And in this case, the thing he most abhorred was adultery. So Seward alludes to that particular line. And it's not that it's a big deal, but I thought it was kind of interesting because it implies, number one, that Seward had read and remembered Don Juan, which is an interesting poem in and of itself, but also that he makes a joke, which is not really something we've seen a whole lot of from Seward. So, good on him. He's in the middle of desperation and horror. He finds himself able to make a joke, and quite a complicated one. And that made me smile. Seward at one point will comment on eating at Jack Straw's castle, which he just kind of throws out there and it's gone. And to us, this sounds very archaic and kind of odd. And it turns out it was actually a pretty well-known pub in the northern part of London, at the northwestern corner of Hampstead Heath, at the junction of Heath Street and Spaniards Road. And it was just, kind of a nice public house. It was very large and not at all Tudor or ye olde looking. It was quite modern looking for the time. So they went someplace that looked rational and not like it belonged in a Gothic romance, which I think matters at this point in the story. The interesting history that I find in my annotations here that may be fun for you history buffs is that the building was originally a coaching inn for stabling horses and for stagecoaches and mail coaches. It was built in 1721, and it derived its name from a reputed comrade of Wat Tyler, the leader of the Peasants' Revolt in 1381 against King Richard II. This is also interesting because Aaron Ziegler on Chopbard is about to commence doing Richard II on his podcast. Interesting. So he was leader of the Peasants' Revolt against King Richard II in 1381. Legend tells that Jack Straw harangued crowds of peasants on the heath from his hay wagon at this spot. So Jack Straw was not really his name, is my guess. During World War II, the pub was extensively damaged. It was rebuilt in 1962. In the 21st century, it has undergone the inevitable transformation into a collection of luxury apartments. Yeah. So much for Jack Straw's Castle pub. And he also mentions going to this pub with a bunch of bicyclists. This is not only plausible, it's quite probable, as in the UK, cycling really took hold in the 1880s. Millions of bicycles, I am reading to you now, millions of bicycles were in use between 1870 and 1890. Brand new bicycles were expensive, naturally. The least expensive model listed in the 1898 Army and Navy Store's catalog was £13. It was equal to over £1,000 today, but cheaper second and third hand models were always available for rent or for sale. So, you could hire a bike if you wanted to go on a day journey and didn't want to wind up having to buy £1,000 bicycle. Now, of course, as with everything, there's another layer to the bicycle thing. Some people viewed this as quite shocking, fearing the implications of this newfound emancipation, particularly in regard to young women. In 1897, Mrs. F. Harcourt Williamson, in, quote, The Cycle in Society, which was, it must have been an article she wrote, moralized The beginning of the cycling was the end of the chaperone in England, and now women, even young girls, ride alone or unattended, only by some casual man friend for miles together through deserted country roads. The danger of this is apparent, but parents and guardians will probably only become wise after the event. I'm not kidding you. That's what it says. Given a lonely road and a tramp desperate with a hunger or naturally vicious, it stands to reason that a girl, or indeed any woman riding alone, must be in some considerable peril. Isn't that marvelous? Yes, well, you can see, though, that this is largely true, that for anyone, I think, even kids, when they finally are able to ride a bicycle, a two-wheel bicycle without training wheels, the feeling of emancipation, of freedom, at being able to just, scoot along on your own is really quite wonderful. And why should it be any different for young, virtuous women? Now, you will hear a reference to a type of candle, and it will make you raise your eyebrows. But there is nothing untoward going on here. You will hear Seward reference a sperm candle, and that is from the spermaceti, which is a white, odorless, waxy substance obtained from the sperm whale and other marine mammals. This is not what you're thinking. And, if we ever get around to doing Moby Dick, you will hear all about the extraction of spermaceti. And I'm sure you'll be much the wiser and happier for it when we get there. However, there was a reason why you would want to use a candle like this. They didn't soften or melt as easily as wax candles did. So, for example, if you were in a hot, enclosed space, it might not be a bad idea to have one of these candles. They were advertised by Harrods as being good for those kinds of situations. There are a couple of other terms that Seward just kind of throws out. It's interesting because this chapter, out of all of the ones we've read so far, has the most use of colloquial or context-specific language, and it all seems to be kind of crammed together. It's interesting. He'll talk about getting a cab near the Spaniards. Well, the Spaniards is still a pub. It was reportedly built in 1585 as a country house for the Spanish ambassador and converted in the mid-18th century by two Spanish brothers to an inn and a public house. Claiming visits over the centuries by highwayman Dick Turpin, poets Lord Byron and John Keats, and author Charles Dickens, the pub is located on Spaniard Road and continues in operation today. Dickens's 1888 Dictionary of London recommended it, the Bull and Bush and Jack Straw's Castle, as the three best places in Hampstead for the refreshment of the inner holiday maker. I love Dickens. Seward uses the term juggle. Is this a juggle at one point? And in this case, he just means, is this a trick that you're playing? Is this a fraud, a deception? There is a phrase used towards the end of the chapter about buying a pig in a poke. You may have heard this phrase before and not have known. Evidently, it was a Scottish phrase. First time it's recorded is in 1530, and it just means buying something that you haven't had a chance to look at. That's all. There are a couple of more things, but I want to wait and talk to you about them after we have listened to this marvelous chapter read for us nearly entirely by Aaron Ziegler of Chopbard Podcast. And with that, I will hand over the reins to Mr. Ziegler.
Dr. Seward's diary continued.
For a while, sheer anger mastered me. It was as if he had, during her life, struck Lucy on the face. I smote the table hard and rose up as I said to him, "Dr. Van Helsing, are you mad?" He raised his head and looked at me, and somehow the tenderness of his face calmed me at once. "Would I were," he said. "Madness were easy to bear compared with the truth like this. Oh, my friend, why think you did I go so far round? Why take so long to tell so simple a thing? Was it because I hate you and have hated you all my life? Was it because I wish to give you pain? Was it that I wanted now, so late, revenge for that time when you saved my life and from a fearful death? Ah, no. Forgive me," I said. He went on. "My friend, it was because I wish to be gentle in the breaking to you, for I know you have loved that so sweet lady. But even yet I do not expect you to believe. It is so hard to accept at once any abstract truth that we may doubt such to be possible when we have always believed the no of it. It is more hard still to accept so sad a concrete truth, and of such a one as Miss Lucy. Tonight I go to prove it. Dare you come with me? This staggered me. A man does not like to prove such a truth. Byron accepted from the category jealousy, and proved the very truth he most abhorred. He saw my hesitation, and spoke. The logic is simple, no madman's logic this time, jumping from tussock to tussock in a misty bog. If it not be true, then proof will be relief. At worst, it will not harm. If it be true, there is the dread. Yet every dread should help my cause, for in it is some need of belief. Come, I tell you what I propose. First, that we go off now and see the child in the hospital. Dr. Vincent of the North Hospital, where the papers say the child is a friend of mine, and I think of yours since you were in class at Amsterdam. He will let 2 scientists see his case, if he will not let 2 friends. We shall tell him nothing, but only that we wish to learn. And then? He took a key from his pocket and held it up. And then we spend the night, you and I, in the churchyard where Lucy lies. This is the key that locked the tomb. I had it from the coffin man to give to Arthur. My heart sank within me, for I felt that there was some fearful ordeal before us. I could do nothing, however, so I plucked up what heart I could and said that we had better hasten as the afternoon was passing. We found the child awake. It had had a sleep and taken some food, and altogether was going on well. Dr. Vincent took the bandages from its throat and showed us the punctures. There was no mistaking the similarity to those which had been on Lucy's throat. They were smaller, and the edges looked fresher, that was all. We asked Vincent to what he attributed them, and he replied that it must have been a bite of some animal, perhaps a rat, but for his part he was inclined to think it was one of the bats which are so numerous on the northern heights of London. Out of so many harmless ones, he said, there may be some wild specimen from the south of a more malignant species. Some sailor may have brought one home and had managed to escape, or even from the zoological gardens a young one may have got loose, or one he bred there from a vampire. These things do occur, you know. Only 10 days ago a wolf got out and was, I believe, traced up in this direction. For a week after, the children were playing nothing but Red Riding Hood on the heath and in every alley in the place until this Bloofer lady scare came along. Since then it has been quite a gala time with them. Even this poor little mite, when he woke up today, asked the nurse if he might go away. When she asked him why he wanted to go, he said he wanted to play with the Bloofer lady. I hope, said Van Helsing, that when you are sending the child home, you will caution its parents to keep strict watch over it. These fancies to stray away are most dangerous, and if the child were to remain out another night, it would probably be fatal. But in any case, I suppose you will not be letting it away for some days? Certainly not. Not for a week at least. Longer if the wound is not healed. Our visit to the hospital took more time than we had reckoned on, and the sun had disappeared before we came out. When Van Helsing saw how dark it was, he said, "There is not hurry. It is more later than I thought. Come, let us seek somewhere that we may eat, and then we shall go on our way." We dined at Jack Straw's castle, along with a little crowd of bicyclists and others who were genially noisy. About 10 o'clock we started from the inn. It was then very dark, and the scattered lamps made the darkness greater when we were once outside their individual radius. The professor had evidently noted the road we were to go, for he went on unhesitatingly. But as for me, I was in quite a mix-up as to locality. As we went further, we met fewer and fewer people, till at last we were somewhat surprised when we met even the patrol of horse police going their usual suburban round. At last, we reached the wall of the churchyard, which we climbed over. With some little difficulty, for it was very dark and the whole place seemed so strange to us, we found the Westenra tomb. The professor took the key, opened the creaky door, and standing back, politely, but quite unconsciously, motioned me to precede him. There was a delicious irony in the offer, in the courtliness of giving preference on such a ghastly occasion. My companion followed me quickly and cautiously drew the door, too, after carefully ascertaining that the lock was a falling and not a springing one, In the latter case, we should have been in a bad plight. Then he fumbled in his bag, and taking out a matchbox and a piece of candle, proceeded to make a light. The tomb in the daytime, and when wreathed with fresh flowers, had looked grim and gruesome enough. But now, some days afterwards, when the flowers hung lank and dead, their whites turning to rust and their greens to browns, when the spider and the beetle had resumed their accustomed dominance, when the time-discolored stone and dust-encrusted mortar and rusty, dank iron and tarnished brass and clouded silver plating gave back the feeble glimmer of a candle, the effect was more miserable and sordid than could have been imagined. It conveyed irresistibly the idea that life, animal life, was not the only thing which could pass away. Van Helsing went about his work systematically, holding his candle so that he could read the coffin plates, and so holding it that the sperm dropped in white patches which congealed as they touched the metal. He made assurance of Lucy's coffin. Another search in his bag, and he took out a turn screw. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "To open the coffin. You shall be convinced." Straight away, he began taking out the screws, and finally lifted off the lid, showing the casing of lead beneath. The sight was almost too much for me. It seemed to be as much an affront to the dead as it would have been to have stripped off her clothing in her sleep whilst living. I actually took hold of his hand to stop him. He only said, "You shall see," and again, fumbling in his bag, took out a tiny fret saw. Striking the turn screw through the lead with a swift downward stab, which made me wince, he made a small hole, which was, however, big enough to admit the point of the saw. I had expected a rush of gas from the weak old corpse. We doctors, who have had to study our dangers, have to become accustomed to such things, and I drew back towards the door. But the professor never stopped for a moment. He sawed down a couple of feet along the side of the lead coffin, and then across, and down the other side. Taking the edge of the loose flange, he bent it backwards towards the foot of the coffin, and holding up the candle into the aperture, motioned to me to look. I drew near and looked. The coffin was empty. It was certainly a surprise to me, and gave me a considerable shock, but Van Helsing was unmoved. He was now more sure than ever of his ground, and so emboldened to proceed in his task. "Are you satisfied now, friend John?" he asked. I felt all the dogged argumentativeness of my nature awake within me as I answered him, "I am satisfied that Lucy's body is not in that coffin, but that only proves one thing." "And what is that, friend John?" "That it is not there." "That is good logic," he said, "so far as it goes. But how can you account for it not being there?" "Perhaps a body snatcher," I suggested. "Some of the undertaker's people may have stolen it." I felt that I was speaking folly, and yet it was the only real cause which I could suggest. The professor sighed. "Ah, well," he said, "we must have more proof. Come with me." He put on the coffin lid again, gathered up all his things and placed them in the bag, blew out the light, and placed the candle also in the bag. We opened the door and went out. Behind us he closed the door and locked it. He handed me the key, saying, "Will you keep it? You had better be assured." I laughed. It was not a very cheerful laugh, I am bound to say, as I motioned him to keep it. "A key is nothing," I said. "There are many duplicates, and anyhow, it is not difficult to pick a lock of this kind." He said nothing, but put the key in his pocket. Then he told me to watch at one side of the churchyard, whilst he would watch at the other. I took up my place behind a yew tree, and I saw his dark figure move until the intervening headstones and trees hid it from my sight. It was a lonely vigil. Just after I had taken my place, I heard a distant clock strike 12, and in time came 1 and 2. I was chilled and unnerved and angry with the professor for taking me on such an errand and with myself for coming. I was too cold and too sleepy to be keenly observant, and not sleepy enough to betray my trust, so altogether I had a dreary, miserable time. Suddenly, as I turned around, I thought I saw something like a white streak moving between 2 dark yew trees at the side of the churchyard farthest from the tomb. At the same time, a dark mass moved from the professor's side of the ground and hurriedly went towards it. Then I too moved, but I had to go round headstones and railed-off tombs, and I stumbled over graves. The sky was overcast, and somewhere far off an early cock crew. A little ways off, beyond a line of scattered juniper trees, which marked the pathway to the church, a white, dim figure flitted in the direction of the tomb. The tomb itself was hidden by trees, and I could not see where the figure had disappeared. I heard the rustle of actual movement where I had first seen the white figure, and coming over, found the professor holding in his arms a tiny child. When he saw me, he held it out to me and said, "Are you satisfied now?" "No," I said in a way that I felt was aggressive. "Do you not see the child?" "Yes, it is a child, but who brought it here, and is it wounded?" "We shall see," said the professor, and with one impulse we took our way out of the churchyard, he carrying the sleeping child. When we had got some little distance away, we went into a clump of trees and struck a match and looked at the child's throat. It was without a scratch or scar of any kind. "Was I right?" I asked triumphantly. "We were just in time," said the professor thankfully. We had now to decide what we were to do with the child, and so consulted about it. If we were to take it to a police station, we should have to give some account of our movements during the night. At least, we should have had to make some statement as to how we had come to find the child. So finally, we decided that we would take it to the heath, and when we heard a policeman coming, would leave it where he could not fail to find it. We would then seek our way home as quickly as we could. All fell out well. At the edge of Hampstead Heath, we heard a policeman's heavy tramp, and laying the child on the pathway, we waited and watched until he saw it as he flashed his lantern to and fro. We heard his exclamation of astonishment, and then we went away silently. By good chance, we got a cab near the Spaniards and drove to town. I cannot sleep, so I make this entry, but I must try to get a few hours' sleep, as Van Helsing is to call for me at noon. He insists that I go with him on another expedition. 27 September. It was 2 o'clock before we found a suitable opportunity for our attempt. The funeral held at noon was all completed, and the last stragglers of the mourners had taken themselves lazily away, when, looking carefully from behind a clump of alder trees, we saw the sexton lock the gate after him. We knew that we were safe till morning did we desire it, but the professor told me that we should not want more than an hour at most. Again I felt that horrid sense of the reality of things, in which any effort of imagination seemed out of place, and I realized distinctly the perils of the law which we were incurring in our unhallowed work. Besides, I felt it was all so useless. Outrageous as it was to open a leaden coffin to see if a woman dead nearly a week were really dead, it now seemed the height of folly to open the tomb again when we knew from the evidence of our own eyesight that the coffin was empty. I shrugged my shoulders, however, and rested silent, for Van Helsing had a way of going on his own road no matter who remonstrated. He took the key, opened the vault, and again courteously motioned me to proceed. The place was not so gruesome as last night, but oh, how unutterably mean-looking when the sunshine streamed in. Van Helsing walked over to Lucy's coffin, and I followed. He bent over and again forced back the leaden flange, and a shock of surprise and dismay shot through me. There lay Lucy, seemingly just as we had seen her the night before her funeral. She was, if possible, more radiantly beautiful than ever, and I could not believe that she was dead. The lips were red, nay, redder than before, and on the cheeks was a delicate bloom. "Is this a juggle?" I said to him. "Are you convinced now?" said the professor in response, and as he spoke, he put over his hand and in a way that made me shudder, pulled back the dead lips and showed the white teeth. "See," he went on, "they are even sharper than before. With this, and he touched one of the canine teeth and that below it, the little children can be bitten. Are you of belief now, friend John?" Once more, argumentative hostility woke within me. I could not accept such an overwhelming idea as he suggested, so with an attempt to argue of which I was even at the moment ashamed, I said, "She may have been placed here since last night." "Indeed, that is so, and by whom?" "I do not know. Someone has done it." "And yet she has been dead 1 week. Most peoples in that time would not look so." I had no answer for this, so was silent. Van Helsing did not seem to notice my silence. At any rate, he showed neither chagrin nor triumph. He was looking intently at the face of the dead woman, raising the eyelids and looking at the eyes, and once more opening the lips, examining the teeth. Then he turned to me and said, Here there is one thing which is different from all recorded. Here is some dual life that is not as the common. She was bitten by the vampire when she was in a trance, sleepwalking. Oh, you start. You do not know that, friend John, but you shall know it later. And in trance, could he best come to take more blood? In trance she dies, and in trance she is undead too. So it is that she differ from all other. Usually when the undead sleep at home, as he spoke, he made a comprehensive sweep of his arm to designate what to a vampire was home, their face show what they are. But this so sweet that was, when she not undead, she go back to the nothing of the common dead. There is no malign there, see? And so it make hard that I must kill her in her sleep. This turned my blood cold, and it began to dawn upon me that I was accepting Van Helsing's theories. But if she were really dead, what was there of terror in the idea of killing her? He looked up at me and evidently saw the change in my face, for he said almost joyously, "Ah, you believe now." I answered, "Do not press me too hard all at once. I am willing to accept. How will you do this bloody work?" "I shall cut off her head and fill her mouth with garlic, and I shall drive a stake through her body." It made me shudder to think of so mutilating the body of the woman whom I had loved, and yet the feeling was not so strong as I had expected. I was, in fact, beginning to shudder at the presence of this being, this undead, as Van Helsing called it, and to loathe it. Is it possible that love is all subjective, or all objective? I waited a considerable time for Van Helsing to begin, but he stood as if wrapped in thought. Presently, he closed the catch of his bag with a snap and said, "I have been thinking, and have made up my mind as to what is best. If I did simply follow my inclining, I would do now, at this moment, what is to be done. But there are other things to follow, and things that are 1,000 times more difficult, in that them we do not know. This is simple. She have yet no life taken, though that is of time, and to act now would be to take danger from her forever. But then we may have to want Arthur, and how shall we tell him of this? If you, who saw the wounds on Lucy's throat, and saw the wounds so similar on the child's at the hospital, if you, who saw the coffin empty last night, and full today with a woman who have not changed only to be more rose and more beautiful in a whole week after she died, if you know of this and know of the white figure last night that brought the child to the churchyard, and yet of your own senses you did not believe, how then can I expect Arthur, who know none of those things, to believe? He doubted me when I took him from her kiss when she was dying. I know he has forgiven me because in some mistaken idea I have done things that prevent him say goodbye as he ought, and he may think that in some more mistaken idea this woman was buried alive, and that in most mistake of all we have killed her. He will then argue back that it is we mistaken ones that have killed her by our ideas, and so he will be much unhappy always. Yet he never can be sure, and that is the worst of all. And he will sometimes think that she he loved was buried alive, and that will paint his dreams with horrors of what she must have suffered, and again he will think that we may be right, and that his so beloved was, after all, an undead. No, I told him once, and since then I learned much. Now, since I know it is all true, 100,000 times more do I know that he must pass through the bitter waters to reach the sweet. He, poor fellow, must have 1 hour that will make the very face of heaven grow black to him. Then we can act for good all round and send him peace. My mind is made up. Let us go. You return home for tonight to your asylum and see that all be well. As for me, I shall spend the night here in this churchyard in my own way. Tomorrow night you will come to me at the Berkeley Hotel at 10 of the clock. I shall send for Arthur to come too, and also that so fine young man of America that gave his blood. Later we shall all have work to do. I come with you so far as Piccadilly, and there dine, for I must be back here before the sunset. So we locked the tomb and came away, and got over the wall of the churchyard, which was not much of a task, and drove back to Piccadilly.
Note left by Van Helsing in his portmanteau, Berkeley Hotel, directed to John Seward, Doctor of Medicine, not delivered. September 27th. Friend John, I write this in case anything should happen. I go alone to watch in that churchyard. It pleases me that the undead, Miss Lucy, shall not leave tonight, so that on the morrow night she may be more eager. Therefore I shall fix some things she like not, garlic and a crucifix, and so seal up the door of the tomb. She is young as undead and will heed. Moreover, these are only to prevent her coming out. They may not prevail her on wanting to get in, for then the undead is desperate and must find the line of least resistance, whatsoever it may be. I shall be at hand all the night from sunset till after sunrise, and if there be aught that may be learned, I shall learn it. For Miss Lucy or from her, I have no fear, but that other to whom is there, that she is undead, he have not the power to seek her tomb and find shelter. He is cunning, as I know from Mr. Jonathan, and from the way that all along he have fooled us when he played with us for Miss Lucy's life, and we lost. And in many ways the undead are strong. He have always the strength in his hand of 20 men, even we 4, who gave our strength to Miss Lucy. It also is all to him. Besides, he can summon his wolf, and I know not what. So if it be that he came thither on this night, he shall find me. But none other shall, until it be too late. But it may be that he will not attempt the place. There is no reason why he should. His hunting ground is more full of game than the churchyard where the undead woman sleeps, and the one old man watch. Therefore I write this in case. Take the papers that are with this, the diaries of Harker and the rest, and read them, and then find this great undead, and cut off his head, and burn his heart, or drive a stake through it, so that the world may rest from him. If it be so, farewell. Van Helsing.
Dr. Seward's Diary, 28 September.
It is wonderful what a good night's sleep will do for one. Yesterday, I was almost willing to accept Van Helsing's monstrous ideas, but now they seem to start out luridly before me as outrageous on common sense. I have no doubt that he believes it all. I wonder if his mind can have become in any way unhinged. Surely there must be some rational explanation of all these mysterious things. Is it possible that the professor can have done it himself? He is so abnormally clever that if he went off his head, he would carry out his intent with regard to some fixed idea in a wonderful way. I am loath to think it, and indeed it would be almost as great a marvel as the one to find that Van Helsing was mad. But anyhow, I shall watch him carefully. I may get some light on the mystery. 29 September. Last night, at a little before 10 o'clock, Arthur and Quincy came into Van Helsing's room. He told us all what he wanted us to do, but especially addressing himself to Arthur, as if all our wills were centered in his. He began by saying that he hoped we would all come with him too, for, he said, there is a grave duty to be done there. You were doubtless surprised at my letter. This query was directly addressed to Lord Godalming. I was. It rather upset me for a bit. There has been so much trouble around my house of late that I could do without any more. I have been curious, too, as to what you mean. Quincy and I talked it over, but the more we talked, the more puzzled we got, till now I can say for myself that I am about up a tree as to any meaning about anything. Me too, said Quincy Morris laconically. Oh, said the professor, then you are nearer the beginning, both of you, than friend John here, who has to go a long way back before he can even get so far as to begin. It was evident that he recognized my return to my old doubting frame of mind without my saying a word. Then, turning to the other two, he said with intense gravity, I want your permission to do what I think good this night. It is, I know, much to ask, and when you know what it is I propose to do, you will know, and only then, how much. Therefore, I ask that you promise me in the dark, so that afterwards, though you may be angry with me for a time, I must not disguise from myself the possibility that such may be. You shall not blame yourselves for anything. That's frank, anyhow, broke in Quincy. I'll answer for the professor. I don't quite see his drift, but I swear he's honest, and that's good enough for me. I thank you, sir, said Van Helsing proudly. I have done myself the honor of counting you one trusting friend, and such endorsement is dear to me. He held out a hand, which Quincy took. Then Arthur spoke out. Dr. Van Helsing, I don't quite like to buy a pig in a poke, as they say in Scotland, and if it be anything in which my honor as a gentleman or my faith as a Christian is concerned, I cannot make such a promise. If you can assure me that what you intend does not violate either of these two, then I give my consent at once, though for the life of me I cannot understand what you are driving at. I accept your limitation, said Van Helsing, and all I ask of you is that if you feel it necessary to condemn any act of mine, you will first consider it well and be satisfied that it does not violate your reservations. Agreed, said Arthur. That is only fair. And now that the pourparlers are over, may I ask what it is we are to do? I want you to come with me, and to come in secret to the churchyard at Kingstead. Arthur's face fell as he said in an amazed sort of way, where poor Lucy is buried. The professor bowed. Arthur went on, and when we're there, to enter the tomb. Arthur stood up. Professor, are you in earnest, or is it some monstrous joke? Pardon me, I see that you are in earnest. He sat down again, but I could see that he sat firmly and proudly, as one who is on his dignity. There was silence until he asked again, and when in the tomb? To open the coffin. This is too much, he said angrily, rising again. I am willing to be patient in all things that are responsible, but in this desecration of the grave of one who... He fairly choked with indignation. The professor looked pityingly at him. If I could spare you one pang, my poor friend, he said, God knows I would. But this night our feet must tread in thorny paths, or later and forever the feet you love must walk in paths of flame. Arthur looked up with set white face and said, Take care, sir, take care. Would it not be well to hear what I have to say, said Van Helsing, and then you will at least know the limit of my purpose. Shall I go on? That's fair enough, broke in Morris. After a pause, Van Helsing went on, evidently with an effort. Miss Lucy is dead. Is not that so? Yes, since there can be no wrong to her. But if she be not dead... Arthur jumped to his feet. Good God, he cried. What do you mean? Has there been any mistake? Has she been buried alive? He groaned in anguish that not even hope could soften. I did not say she was alive, my child. I did not think it. I go no further than to say that she might be undead. Undead? Not alive? What do you mean? Is this all a nightmare, or what is this? There are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. Believe me, we are now on the verge of one, but I have not done. May I cut off the head of dead Miss Lucy? Heavens and earth, no, cried Arthur in a storm of passion. Not for the wide world will I consent to any mutilation of her dead body. Dr. Van Helsing, you try me too far. What have I done to you that you should torture me so? What did that poor, sweet girl do that you should want to cast such dishonor on her grave? Are you mad that you speak of such things, or am I mad to listen to them? Don't dare think more of such a desecration. I shall not give my consent to anything you do. I have a duty to do in protecting her grave from outrage, and by God I shall do it. Van Helsing rose up from where he had all the time been seated, and said gravely and sternly, My Lord Godalming, I too have a duty to do, a duty to others, a duty to you, a duty to the dead, and by God I shall do it. All I ask you now is that you come with me, that you look and listen, and if, when later I make the same request, you do not be more eager for its fulfillment even than I am, then I shall do my duty, whatever it may seem to me, and then, to follow your lordship's wishes, I shall hold myself at your disposal to render an account to you when and where you will. His voice broke a little, and he went on with a voice full of pity. But I beseech you, do not go forth in anger with me. In a long life of acts which were often not pleasant to do, and which sometimes did wring my heart, I have never had so heavy a task as now. Believe me that if the time comes for you to change your mind towards me, one look from you will wipe away all this sad hour, for I would do what a man can to save you from sorrow. Just think, for why should I give myself so much labor and so much of sorrow? I have come here from my own land to do what I can of good, at the first to please my friend John, and then to help a sweet young lady whom, too, I come to love. For her, I am ashamed to say so much, but I say it in kindness, I gave what you gave, the blood of my veins. I gave it, I who was not like you, her lover, but only her physician and her friend. I gave her my nights and days before death, after death, and if my death can do her good even now, when she is the dead undead, she shall have it freely. He said this with a very grave, sweet pride, and Arthur was much affected by it. He took the old man's hand and said in a broken voice, "Oh, it is hard to think of it, and I cannot understand, but at least I shall go with you and wait."
Poor Arthur. Boy, he kind of came out of nowhere into this, didn't he? Everything was fine. Lucy was dead. He was sad. Now she's dead undead. What up, yo? So we're heading back towards Lucy's tomb, but before I leave you for today, with that cheerful thought in this holiday season, there were a couple things I wanted to explain or make sure that you noticed once we got to this side of the narrative. I didn't want to do it too early. So there's some strangeness with the mythology that I mentioned last week that's going to continue to be kind of odd over the next couple of chapters. And I don't know if it's because Stoker made a mistake, or because Stoker just didn't care, or because Van Helsing is making a mistake, or what. At this point, we just don't know. But what we do know is that Harker didn't say that Dracula looked younger, necessarily, when he was asleep during the daytime. But Lucy here is gorgeous. Now, is that because of this trance state rule that Van Helsing has just dropped on us? This idea that she's somehow not so much a vampire because she was turned while she was in a trance state, and so therefore she's not really responsible, maybe, and so that makes her not such a bad vampire. It's still pretty unclear about that. But these rules of engagement do continue to be expressed and be important to the story. So right now, this is what we know from Van Helsing, and that's pretty much all we know. Now, the staking of the body in some folklore tradition is to immobilize the vampire, not to kill it. So the kind of typical, you drive a stake through the heart of a vampire, I think is what gets said kind of flippantly, because honestly, that's pretty easy sounding compared to cutting off its head and sticking garlic in its mouth, which is really kind of yicky. Somehow driving a 2.5-3 inch stake through a body doesn't bug us quite so much. Maybe it's just that we're more used to it. But yeah, that was just to stop them from moving, or maybe just to give you a handle to hold on to while you were trying to cut its head off. I don't know. The other thing, though, that I wanted to bring your attention to was this very real fear of a premature burial. Now, I have been racking my brains to try and remember when we came across this before. I think it was in Connecticut Yankee. There were these security coffins that had been invented where you had a bell rigged inside the coffin to the hand or the foot or both of the corpse. And then you could put the lid on it and everything was fine. And if they were alive and started to move, then the bell would ring. And so these morgues, the public morgue, or sometimes these morgue houses or mortuary houses or death houses, would have corpses in coffins for quite some time, because putrefaction of the body, the idea that the body would rot, that would definitely clue you in that someone was actually dead. And it was really the only way to be absolutely certain. They did all sorts of other kind of creepy things, poking you with sharp things and stuff like that. But But the security coffin idea was really quite humane. And evidently, more than once, the bells were rung. There are a number of states that human bodies can go into where they are non-responsive. Comas are probably the most easy to understand, but there are also weird toxins that you can come into contact with that shut down parts of your central nervous system. There are all sorts of weird things that can happen. And so stories of premature burial kind of spiked in the 1800s, whether they were urban legends and urban myths or real stories, who knows? Clearly they got into the head of Edgar Allan Poe, and even Wilkie Collins and Conan Doyle wound up with premature burials figuring in some of their stories. So it is not at all macabre or weird that this would have occurred to Arthur immediately. Oh my God, what do you mean? Has she been buried alive? It's pretty bad. So that is where I will leave you. I know, really cheerful holiday greetings to you. It just occurred to me that while you're cooking and puttering around and wrapping presents, perhaps something light and happy like Dracula would keep you entertained. I'm sorry, but it's, we're in an exciting part of the book, so I hope I didn't pull you too far out of your holidayisms. And for those of you who are not listening in real time, I hope you had fun with a rockin' good chapter. The next chapter is equally wonderful. And so on that note, I leave you with wishes for happy holidays and a good last week of 2011. And if all goes well, another podcast will post next Friday. Take care. Have a good one. Bye. Please remember to support the people who support CraftLit. Visit Knit Circus online magazine, offering 3 rings of knitting, sewing, and fun. You can check out the latest issue at www.knitcircus.com. And what would Madame Defarge knit? A new book of knit and crochet patterns coming to you from the CraftLit family. And please visit the blogs and sites of CraftLit supporters. Those links can be found in the sidebar of the show notes. The show notes can be found at craftlit.com. CraftLit can also be accessed by its own Android and iPhone application. You can purchase it at the iPhone or iTouch application store, or you can subscribe free at iTunes. CraftLit is made possible by the generous support of its listeners, and for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one.